If you would please turn to Exodus chapter 17. The background to this story is that Moses and Aaron have led the Israelites out of bondage in Egypt. They've crossed the Red Sea, and now they've met several challenges. One of them in the beginning of Exodus chapter 17 is that they were looking for water, and the people were complaining, and God instructed Moses to strike the rock, and water came forth. And so they're on their journey to the way of Mount Sinai, where they would receive the law, where also not only they would receive the commandments, but they'd also receive the pattern for the tabernacle in preparation for them to go into the promised land. And so in Exodus chapter 17 and verse 8, we see another challenge that they met, or that they encountered. And in verse 8 it says, "Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim." Now before we read the next verse, who were the Amalekites descendants of? Here's our Bible trivia question this morning. They can be traced back. In other words, they are distant relatives of the nation of Israel. So Amalekites were descendants of who? Okay, you can go back to Abraham, but it was a little bit closer of, I guess you could say Adam, and that would be correct as well. They were actually descendants of Esau. So Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, we have the nation of Israel coming from Jacob, from Abraham, but Jacob's brother being Esau. And so there was conflict between Jacob and Esau. There was deceitfulness on Jacob's part. There was foolishness and selling his birthright, but then the blessing being stolen by Jacob from Esau. But so the Amalekites were descendants from Esau. And so what is happening is Israel is traveling. They're following the pillar of cloud by day, the pillar of fire by night, and God is leading them to Mount Sinai. And those that were older, those that were sick, those that were injured would have been towards the rear. And so the Amalekites are beginning to do battle. They're attacking the weaker portion of Israel. The next verse says this, "And Moses said unto Joshua, Choose us out men, and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand." So we have two important characters, or two important people here. We have Moses, who is the leader of the nation of Israel. We have Joshua, who were introduced here, and he's going to be kind of the military captain, so a very important position. He would also go up with Moses on Mount Sinai, and later on Joshua would be the one, when Moses passes on the scene, that Joshua would be the next leader of the nation of Israel. And really the whole book of Joshua is basically a description of his life and leading the Israelites in the promised land in the conquering of Canaan. So Moses and Joshua, two really important key people in Israel's history. So Moses is choosing men to go out and to fight with Amalek. And it says here in the next verse, "So Joshua did as Moses had said to him, and fought with Amalek, and Moses and Aaron and went up to the top of the hill." So Moses, Joshua, Aaron. Aaron's a pretty important person, right? I mean, Aaron is the brother of Moses. Aaron was the one who has already been kind of tabbed as a spokesperson for Moses, because Moses was of slow speech, and he had a speaking impediment. And so before Pharaoh, Aaron was a spokesperson. And later on, Aaron would be the one who would be the high priest of Israel, and his sons would follow on. So we have Joshua, we have Moses, we have Aaron, and then we're introduced to her. So Joshua's fighting, Moses, Aaron, and Hur go on top of the hill. So who is this individual, Hur? Several passages of Scripture that have his name. I believe his name is mentioned 15 times in the Old Testament, and I have a couple of those. So we've already seen here in verse number 10, his name mentioned. Verse 12 says, "But Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone and put it under him, and sat thereon, and Aaron and stayed up his hands." So that's the second time his name was mentioned. In Exodus chapter 24 and verse 14, when they're at Mount Sinai, it says, "And he said unto elders," this is Moses speaking, tarry ye here for us until we come again unto you. And behold, Aaron and Hur are here with you. If any man have any matters to do, let him come unto you. So later on, when they're at Mount Sinai, when Moses went up, he gave the kind of the leadership of the nation of Israel to Aaron, and Hur was also there to be an assistant to Aaron. Exodus 31:2 says, See, I have called by name Bezaleel, the son of Uriah, the son of Ur, of the tribe of Judah. Exodus 35:30, and Moses said unto the children of Israel, See, the Lord hath called by name Bezaleel, the son of Uriah, the son of Ur, of the tribe of Judah. Exodus 38:22, and Bezaleel, the son of Uriah, the son of Ur, of the tribe of Judah. Joshua 13:21, and Ur begat Uri, and Uri begat Bezaleel. Then 2 Chronicles 1:5, moreover, the brazen altar that Bezaleel, the son of Uriah, the son of Ur, had made, he put in the tabernacle of the Lord. And there's another passage where it talks about Ur being the son of Caleb. So and there's a couple mentions of another man by the name of Ur, but it was not the same person here. So not much in the Bible is mentioned of him. First mention is here with Moses and Aaron going up on the hill while Joshua's fighting. And then later on, he's at Mount Sinai, and he has kind of a position of leadership with Aaron while Moses and Joshua up on the mount. But I think that, at least from what I can see, the main association of Ur is his grandson, Bezaleel, who basically was the one who God helped fashion the tabernacle. He was kind of in charge of the construction of the tabernacle and the different pieces of furniture and everything that had to do with it. So not an upfront person like Moses, like Aaron, like Joshua, but Ur had a very important position in the nation of Israel. And so last week we looked at Barnabas and how Barnabas was not really an upfront person, kind of a behind the scenes, but Barnabas had a place and he had a purpose. And so this morning I just want to share a couple of observations about Ur in a lesson that is entitled Honored to be a Ur. Again, Moses, Joshua, Aaron, but now we're introduced to Ur. Not from the scriptures, but some Jewish writings tend to believe that Ur ended up marrying Miriam, which would have been Moses' sister. So he could have possibly been a brother-in-law to Moses. So there is some possible connection there. But just a couple of observations about honored to be at Ur. First of all, with this would be in verse 10, we see his position. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him and fought with Amalek, and Moses and Aaron and Ur went up to the top of the hill. So it's the significance of the position of Ur is that he was available. He was in a place where he could be used and he could go up with Moses and with Aaron. So because he was in his place, because he was in his position, God could use him. And I'm reminded how important it is for each and every one of us to be in our place. Whether that is at home, the place that God would have us to be, whether that is here in the church and it may be in a different area of ministry. At camp, I was just reminded again of the camp staff. And it was a smaller week of camp. I think they had just right around 60 teenagers, definitely a lot smaller than junior camp, where they had well over 100 juniors. And so it kind of seemed small in that aspect. But for camp to run smoothly, everyone had to be in their place. And we had our counselor, our cabin counselor, his name was Tim. He was from Iowa, and he works construction for his dad's construction business. And Tim was telling us, he had a position, or he had a place in our cabin. He also had several responsibilities throughout the day as well. And he was telling me one night, he said, I forgot to be in my place last night. And so even at night, they had counselors strategically placed all over just to kind of help make sure that the campers didn't wander off, for lack of a better description. He said, yeah, he said, I wasn't in my place, but I'm glad that nothing happened. So it's important. Finds himself up on the hill with Moses and with Aaron, but it was because he was faithful in his place and in the position that he had. And so I want to encourage you, whether as a husband or a wife, or as a child or as a parent, as a person part here at Open Door Baptist Church, God has each and every one of us in a position, and God help us to be faithful in that position where God has called us. We never know what opportunities or what blessings we may miss because we were not in our place. And so, first of all, we see his position. He was found in his place. But then we take a look next at his potential. His potential in verses 11 through 12, and it says, and it came to pass when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. So in this Bible story, Joshua is out fighting with the Amalekites, and the Amalekites were descendants of Esau, and Esau was very fleshly minded, and so the Amalekites, their nation is a dependence of, or is a illustration or a demonstration of the appetites of the flesh and the attacks of the flesh. And so they're fighting against the Israelites, and Joshua is fighting with them. And Moses, the leader, is up on the hill with the rod of God. And again, the rod was a representation of the authority and of the power of God. And so it wasn't a good luck charm, but what it was demonstrating dependence upon God. So as Moses lifted the rod of God up, the Israelites were victorious. Joshua is battling. But as soon as his hands got heavy and it began to lower, it says in verse 12, but Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat thereon. And Aaron and stayed up his hands, the one on the one side and the one on the other sides, and his hands were heavy until the going down of the sun. So again, back in verse 11, as long as his hands were raised with the rod of God, they were victorious. But as soon as he lowered it, they began to lose in the battle. And that is a picture or a representation of the importance of prayer. And I think to me that besides his grandson being Bezalel, and what great joy it is for us as parents, you know, as we start off as a young adult, there is a pursuit to excel in our field and what God has called us to and how God has equipped us. And there's that pursuit, but as the Lord blesses with children, for those that have children, and we see them grow up, how parents take great pleasure in their children, and their children doing right, their children living for the Lord and being a success in what God's called them. But, I mean, we haven't gotten to the stage of grandparenthood yet. But for those of you that are grandparents, I can only imagine what it's like when you have a grandchild and they're doing right and they're living for the Lord and they're a success in what God has called them. I'm sure that was just thrilled with his grandson Bezalel and all that God did for him. But I'd say besides Bezalel, what is known for is his support for the leadership of Moses and helping assist him in raising his hands when they were heavy. And so his potential. The potential was there was great victory available, and we kind of know the rest of the story because the Israelites were victorious. But that potential would have never been achieved unless wasn't in his place. He wasn't in the position where God had called him to, and he wasn't willing to go forward. One of the messages that evangelist Alton Beale preached at the end was from the passage in Ezekiel, and he talked about the spiritual decline in Israel with the priests and the princes and the prophets. And then there's that passage where God says, I sought for a man among me that would stand in the gap and make up the hedge, but I found none. And his last message was, I thought God used it in the hearts of the teens, but he began to talk about, he's the president of Ambassador Baptist College, and he said, there's not a week that goes by that I don't get a call from a church looking for a pastor. And he says, I can't even recommend a bad pastor. He said, there's not many out there. And so his challenge to the teenagers was this. You see a group of about 60 teenagers there. There is great potential for God. In the music competition, and Justin and Angelina did great in the music competition, and you can ask them, but in 2 Sundays, they'll kind of talk about that a little bit. But one of the blessings was in all of the categories, there were young men that were competing. And that was a thrill. In the piano finalists, there were 2 guys and 1 girl. In the vocal group competition, there were 3 duets of boys that were singing. And so the potential for young people to serve the Lord. And so this was a challenge. He said, I don't know that God is calling you young men to be in the ministry, to be a pastor, to be an evangelist, to be a missionary, or you young ladies to be a Christian school teacher, to be a missionary, or to be a pastor's wife, or to be this or to be that in the ministry. But would you at least be willing? And that was kind of the thrust of the message. Would you be willing if God has called you to do that? Great potential, but just because there's great potential doesn't mean that it's achieved. Do you think that it was challenging and difficult for as he was up there? Thinking about it, no one knows me. I'm a nobody. I'm insignificant. But wow, I'm up here with Moses. I'm up here with Aaron. And Moses is a leader. He's the one that stretched out the rod before Pharaoh, and the miracles were performed in Egypt. He's the one that stretched the rod at the Red Sea, and the Red Sea parted. And he's the one that struck the rock just earlier in this. We just saw him strike the rock, and water came forth from the rock. He's the one that's important. He's the one that God is using. But his potential, he had great potential, and we'll see that potential was achieved because he participated. His participation. And verse 12, as it talks about Moses' hands being heavy and them taking a stone and putting him sitting on the stone, and Aaron and they stayed up his hands. In other words, they participated in the calling of God for Moses to intercede, to pray, and they were a participant in that. So not only was his position, was he in his place, and not only did he have great potential because there was a victory, and the potential was for victory, but he participated in it. And I think about what God wants to do in our homes. He wants for there to be victory in our homes. He wants for marriages to be thriving, and for marriages to be unified, and for there to be peace and harmony in the marriage and in the home with the parents and the children. But each one needs to be an active participant in being who God has called them and placed them to be. I think about the ministries of our church and the opportunities of our church and the different outreaches, the different opportunities that are available. We need people to be in their place, to have their potential achieved, and to be participants. One of the kind of the side blessings of Evangelist Beal, and I heard him when he preached. It was the year of COVID that we only had like a 3-day camp week, and we actually sat out in the rodeo corral, all socially distant and all that stuff. So I heard him preach then, and I heard him preach here. But he didn't grow up in a Christian home. His father was a drunkard. And the reason why he got saved, the reason why he went to church, is because there was a church that had a van ministry. They went and picked him up. And he got saved. And then he got discipled. And then he went off to Bible college. And now he's a president of a Bible college, but he's also an evangelist, and he's helping equip local churches. He's preaching at Christian camps, and lives are changed. What is the potential of the different ministries here at Open Door Baptist Church? Are people in their places? Are they participating to see that potential achieved, the potential of our church? And so his position, his potential, his participation, and then we also see his persistence. In verse 12, part of that it says, and his, speaking to Moses, hands were steady until the going down of the sun. While up there, I'm sure there would have been many things that could have distracted him. I mean, he could have gotten bored. It could have been a difficult thing for him to help. I mean, Moses is the one that's holding the rod, but Aaron and kind of help holding his hands up. And so he was persistent in being exactly where God had called him to be, in serving and actively participating. He didn't just start, but he finished. That was one of the devotions that I gave the guys in our cabin. I think it was on Thursday night, from Ecclesiastes 7:8. Better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof. And how we need to be completers. We need to finish what God has called us to. And so was persistent to finish. I wonder in our lives, in what God has called us, are we persistent? Are we persistent in our area of service? Are we persistent as a parent, as a spouse, or maybe as a child, as a witness, as a student in school, interacting, as a worker in a company? Are we persistent in our witness, in our testimony? Are we persistent in our prayer life? Praying for our family, praying for our church, praying for our community, our country, for our government leaders, for those that are in authority over us. Was persistent, and because of his persistency, he was able to be a partaker of the victory. So when it comes to people in Israel's history, when it comes to traveling from Egypt to the Canaan land, certainly Moses, Aaron, Joshua would be three very key names. But also had a very important role. He was in his place. He had great potential. He was a participant in the ministry and in the leadership that God had called Moses to, and then he was persistent to see it through. God help us to be like that We may not be in the front light. We may not be before people, and people may never know. But God help us to be in our place, to achieve our potential by his grace, to be participants and to be persistent.